My brother slept with my wife, I found out our son isn't mine, and now they're both paying the price. The day I caught my brother's scent on my wife's skin was the day I finally understood. Some monsters aren't born. They're carefully crafted by the people who should have protected you from them. This is the story of how I discovered my entire life was built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and the most intimate betrayal imaginable. There are some wounds that time never heals, scars that remain raw no matter how many years pass. I once believed nothing could be worse than having your own family turn their backs on you. I was wrong. The cruelest betrayal comes from those closest to you. My name is Ethan, and this is my warning to you. Growing up, I was the invisible child in our house. My brother Ryan was the golden boy, the center of our mother Margaret's universe. While I was quiet and studious, Ryan was charismatic and manipulative. He knew exactly how to work a room, especially when that room contained our mother. Ryan needs help with his homework, Ethan, she'd say, not even looking up from her magazine. You're the big brother. You need to help him. It didn't matter that I had my own assignments due. It didn't matter that Ryan was perfectly capable but just didn't want to do the work. What mattered was keeping Ryan happy. You're the older one, became the mantra that defined my childhood. You need to sacrifice. But sacrifice what? My time, my belongings, my dignity? All of the above, as it turned out. Ryan wasn't just spoiled. He was cruel. He'd tear pages from my books just to see my reaction. He'd sneak into my room, read my journal, then twist my private thoughts into ammunition for Mom. Ethan thinks you're a terrible mother, he'd say, his eyes wide with fake innocence. Mom always believed him. Always. He stole my allowance regularly. If caught, a few crocodile tears would ensure Mom gave him more. He's just a child, she'd say, though by then Ryan was 13. I was 15 but somehow expected to be the adult. His torments escalated. One morning, I bit down on cereal and nearly broke a tooth. Ryan had put small rocks in my bowl when I wasn't looking. He joined the bullies at school who already targeted me, making sure I had no safe haven anywhere. You should just die, useless, he whispered one night, standing over my bed. I pretended to be asleep, but those words kept me awake until dawn. That's when I realized a terrible truth. No one in this house would really care if I disappeared. The closest I came to serious injury was the day Ryan decided it would be funny to try setting my hair on fire. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when I smelled something burning. In the reflection of my laptop screen, I saw Ryan behind me, lighter in hand, flame dancing dangerously close to my head. I jerked away, knocking over my chair, heart hammering in my chest. Mom! Ryan immediately began his performance. Ethan's freaking out. I was just playing. Mom rushed in, ready with her usual defense. He was just joking around, Ethan. Why do you always overreact? But this time, Dad had seen everything from the hallway. Dad, Richard, who worked long hours and rarely intervened in our brotherly disputes, as Mom called them. That's enough, he said, his voice quieter than I expected, but filled with a rage I'd never heard before. He grabbed the lighter from Ryan's hand. You could have seriously hurt your brother. Do you understand that? Ryan's face showed genuine shock. He wasn't used to consequences. If you ever do anything like this again, Dad continued, I'll call the police myself. Do you understand me? For the first time in my memory, I saw fear in Ryan's eyes. The next day, Dad took me to sign up for MMA classes. You need to learn to stand up for yourself, he said simply. At first, I couldn't imagine myself fighting anyone. I'd spent so long making myself small, trying to avoid notice. But with each session, something changed. Not just my body, but something deeper. Ryan didn't know about the classes, and that would be his biggest mistake. For 6 months, I transformed silently. My shoulders broadened, my confidence grew with each session. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his reign of terror, oblivious to the change happening right under his nose. I was no longer the same frightened boy who flinched at his every movement. The day that changed everything came on an ordinary Tuesday. I had saved up for concert tickets after working weekends at a local bookstore. 3 crisp $50 bills sat in my desk drawer, tucked inside my copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. a story about revenge that had become my strange comfort. That afternoon, I returned early from school and caught Ryan red-handed, my book open, money in his fingers. He didn't even try to hide it. "What are you going to do about it?" he sneered, pocketing my money. "Go cry to Dad?" Something inside me, something that had been building for years, finally snapped. Without hesitation, my fist connected with his face. Not a wild, desperate swing like you'd expect from someone who'd never fought back. It was calculated, precise, just like my trainer had taught me. Ryan stumbled backward, blood trickling from his nose. Shock painted his features as he touched his face and saw red on his fingertips. I stepped forward, reached into his pocket, and took back my money. "Don't ever touch my things again," I said, my voice steady. When he tried to get up, I shoved him back down. For the first time in his life, Ryan cried real tears. Not the manipulative kind he used on Mom, but tears of genuine fear and humiliation. On cue, Mom burst into the room, drawn by the commotion. She took one look at Ryan's bloody face and started screaming at me. "What have you done to your brother? How could you hurt him like this?" Dad appeared in the doorway behind her. "What's going on here?" For once, I spoke first. "Ryan stole money from my drawer. I caught him and took it back." "I was just borrowing it," Ryan protested, his voice high and desperate. "I was going to pay it back." Dad looked between us, then fixed his gaze on Ryan. "You're lucky all you got was a bloody nose. If you pulled this with someone else, they might have called the police." Mom's mouth fell open. "Richard, he's hurt." "And he's a thief?" Dad replied flatly. "He needs to learn actions have consequences." That moment changed everything between us. As Ryan glared at me from behind Mom's protective embrace, I saw something new in his eyes. Hatred mixed with fear. I'd shattered his illusion of power, and he would never forgive me for it. I thought I'd won that day. I believed standing up to Ryan would make him back down, that finally claiming my power would fix everything. I couldn't have been more wrong. What I didn't understand then was that some people can't accept defeat. They don't learn from it or grow. Instead, it festers inside them, turning to poison. I went off to college 3 years later, thinking I'd escaped. I met Karen, fell in love, and for the first time, felt like my life was truly mine. I should have known better than to let my guard down. Ryan wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. He was just waiting, planning for the perfect moment to destroy everything I'd built. And when that moment came, I never saw it coming. College was my salvation. When I received that acceptance letter, I felt like a prisoner granted unexpected freedom. For the first time in 18 years, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder, exist without fighting for the right to take up space. My dorm room was small but gloriously mine. No Ryan to invade my privacy, no Mom to excuse his behavior, no walking on eggshells. I made friends easily once I wasn't Ryan's weird brother anymore. I joined clubs, maintained good grades, and discovered parts of myself that had been suppressed for years. It was at a campus Halloween party where I met her. Karen. She was dressed as Morticia Adams, all elegant lines and sharp wit. I was immediately captivated by her laugh. Uninhibited and genuine, something I wasn't used to in my household of carefully constructed performances. "Let me guess," she said when I approached her. "You're a fighter trying to look like a college student?" I blushed, realizing my MMA training had changed me more than I thought. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who's paying attention," she replied with a smile that made my heart race. We talked until sunrise. She was studying psychology, loved classic literature, and had a way of listening that made me feel truly heard. Within weeks, we were inseparable. I told her everything. About Ryan, about my childhood, about the fear that had shaped me. She held my hand through the telling of it, and I mistook her perfect responses for perfect understanding. 2 years into our relationship, Karen missed her period. The pregnancy test showed positive, and despite the fear that gripped me, fear of failing as a father the way mine had often failed me, I knew what I wanted. "Let's get married," I said, holding her close. "Let's build the family neither of us had growing up." The wedding was small but meaningful. Dad gave a toast that made me tear up, talking about how proud he was of the man I'd become. Mom seemed genuinely happy for us, though she spent most of the reception fussing over Ryan, who was unexpectedly charming throughout the entire event. "Congratulations, big brother," he said, embracing me with what felt like sincerity. His smile seemed wider than usual, his eyes brighter. At the time, I thought perhaps he'd changed, matured. I even dared to hope we might repair our relationship. I was blind to the truth hiding behind that smile. After the wedding, subtle changes began in Karen. She grew protective of her phone, often texting late into the night, claiming it was just friends from study group. Sometimes I'd find her staring into space, a faraway look in her eyes that disappeared the moment she noticed my attention. Whenever I mentioned Ryan, which wasn't often, she would change the subject or suddenly remember an errand she needed to run. Once, I noticed her quickly end a call when I entered our apartment unexpectedly early from class. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Just my mom," she said, but the slight tremor in her voice raised goosebumps on my arms. I should have questioned more. I should have paid attention to these red flags. But Karen was pregnant with our child, and I was determined to be nothing like my parents. I trusted her completely, loved her blindly. That trust was about to be shattered in ways I couldn't imagine. 3 months ago, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, everything I believed about my life disintegrated. Karen came home early from work, her face ashen, hands visibly trembling. I was playing with Henry, our 3-year-old son, building block towers on the living room floor. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "After Henry's asleep?" I nodded, suddenly uneasy. The hours crawled by as we went through our nightly routine. Dinner, bath time, bedtime story. Each moment under the weight of Karen's unspoken confession felt like walking through quicksand. Finally, with Henry tucked in, Karen sat across from me at our kitchen table. Her fingers twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Ethan," she began, swallowing hard, "there's something you need to know. Henry, he might not be yours." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The kitchen light seemed too bright suddenly, the ticking of our wall clock thunderously loud. "What are you saying?" I managed finally, my voice unnaturally calm. "Who would be his father then?" She bit her lip, eyes fixed on the table between us. When she spoke, it was barely a whisper. "Ryan." 1 syllable. My brother's name. It was enough to collapse my entire world. "No," I said automatically. "That's impossible." But even as I denied it, pieces began falling into place. Her strange behavior whenever Ryan was mentioned, the late-night texts, Henry's eyes that never quite matched mine or Karen's. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, finally looking up. "It started at that first Thanksgiving, when you brought me home to meet your family." Ryan cornered me in the kitchen and said, "Things." "What things?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "That you were the weak one. That you might have won a battle, but he always wins the war. He made it feel exciting, dangerous, like I was the prize in some game between you two." Each word was a knife twisting deeper. She continued, detailing their betrayal with brutal honesty. The New Year's Eve party 3 years ago, when she claimed a headache and went home early. She'd met Ryan at a hotel. The business trips that mysteriously aligned with Ryan's visits to our city. The times she was working late, but came home smelling of unfamiliar cologne. "When I found out I was pregnant," she said, "I wasn't sure who the father was. I chose you because I knew you'd be reliable, that you'd be a good father. Ryan never wanted that responsibility." I thought of Henry's birthday parties, his first steps, the nights I'd stayed up rocking him through fevers and nightmares. 3 years of loving a child who might be living proof of the ultimate betrayal. "I do love you, Ethan," Karen pleaded, reaching for my hand. I pulled away as if her touch would burn me. "It ended with Ryan months ago, I swear. We can work through this." I stood up silently, walked to our bedroom and pulled out a duffel bag. Methodically, I began packing essentials, clothes, toiletries, my laptop. Karen followed, panic rising in her voice. "What are you doing? You can't leave. Henry needs you." I turned to face her, feeling nothing but a vast emptiness where my heart should be. "Henry isn't my son." "You don't know that for sure. We can get a test, she cried, grabbing my arm. Please, Ethan. 3 years as his father can't be erased. Test or no test, you're his dad. I gently removed her hand. I need time, was all I could say. That night, I checked into a motel with the hollow feeling that my life had been a carefully constructed lie. Sleep eluded me as I cycled through rage, grief, and a devastating sense of betrayal. By morning, one thing was clear. I couldn't stay silent about what Ryan had done. I drove to my parents' house the next day. Dad answered the door, his smile fading when he saw my haggard appearance. Son, what's wrong? Mom appeared beside him, immediately fussing. Ethan, you look terrible. Come in, I'll make coffee. I followed them to the kitchen, the same kitchen where Ryan and Karen's betrayal had apparently begun. Mom busied herself with the coffee maker while Dad sat across from me, concern etched in his face. I need to tell you something, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. About Ryan. Mom froze mid-movement. I looked directly at her as I continued. Do you know what your precious son has done? The bitterness in my voice was palpable. He slept with my wife, repeatedly. Henry might be his son, not mine. Dad's face drained of color. Mom's reaction, however, was entirely predictable. That can't be true, she said immediately, shaking her head. Ryan wouldn't do that. There must be some mistake. Karen confessed everything yesterday, I replied flatly. But you still don't believe me, do you? After everything he's done, you still take his side. I'm not taking sides, Mom protested weakly. I just think, let's call him, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. Right now. Before they could object, I dialed Ryan's number, putting it on speaker. He answered on the third ring. Ethan, this is unexpected. Karen told me everything, I said without preamble. About you two. About Henry possibly being yours. A pause, then. She did what? His voice had changed, defensive and slightly panicked. You heard me? Do you want to deny it? Another pause, longer this time. Then Ryan's voice, lower now. Look, it wasn't all my fault. She came on to me too, you know. That woman's not as innocent as you think. So you're not denying it, I pressed. What do you want me to say? Ryan's voice turned bitter. That I'm sorry? Would that make you feel better? I didn't force her to do anything. Not my fault if women prefer me over you. Dad grabbed the phone from my hand. Ryan, this is your father. The silence on the other end was deafening. You've just admitted everything to my face, Dad continued, his voice like ice. You are no longer my son. Don't call this house again. Don't expect another dime from me. You're done. He hung up before Ryan could respond. Mom started crying, but Dad turned to her with a hardness I'd never seen before. Margaret, you need to choose right now. If you contact him, if you send him money, if you so much as text him, you can join him. I mean it. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother speechless. Ryan's perfect world collapsed that day. Dad canceled his credit cards, stopped paying his rent, and had the locks changed on the beach house Ryan had been using. Within weeks, he was reportedly couch surfing with increasingly reluctant friends. 3 months passed. I filed for divorce, moved into a small apartment, and threw myself into work. The paternity test confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Henry wasn't biologically mine. But the court still granted me visitation rights based on my role as his psychological father for the first 3 years of his life. Then came the call. Ryan's name on my screen nearly made me reject it, but curiosity won out. Ethan. I need help, he said, his voice barely recognizable. He sounded broken, desperate. I've got nothing left. Dad cut me off completely. Karen's demanding child support for Henry. I can't even make rent. I laughed, a cold sound I barely recognized. Remember when you watched those kids beat me up in 8th grade and you laughed? Today's that day for you. Please, he begged. You're the only one I can turn to. I hung up without answering. Some bridges once burned should remain ashes. 2 weeks later, Dad called me to his study. He looked older, the betrayal aging him beyond his years. I've changed my will, he said without preamble, sliding a document across his desk. Everything goes to you. All of it. The house, investments, savings. About $2 million total. I skimmed the document, stopping at a particular line. $1 to Ryan? Dad's expression hardened. So he can't claim I forgot him. The law requires something, so I gave him the minimum. $1 to remind him what he's worth to me now. When Ryan found out, his reaction was predictable. Dad's lawyer reported that Ryan had stormed into his office, overturned furniture, and threatened legal action. But the will was ironclad. Dad had made sure of it. Ryan's final play was as desperate as it was predictable. He went to Mom, the one person who had never been able to see through him. I discovered this when I arrived for Sunday dinner and overheard them arguing in the kitchen. He made a mistake, Richard, Mom pleaded. A terrible mistake, but he's still our son. He betrayed his own brother in the worst possible way, Dad responded, his voice low but intense. He destroyed Ethan's family. He's no son of mine. I've been talking to him, Mom admitted. He's suffering. He needs help. Dad went still. You've been in contact with him? Against my explicit wishes? I'm his mother, she said defensively. Then you have a choice to make right now, Margaret. If you want to support him, pack your bags and go. You won't do it under my roof. For the first time in her life, Mom faced the consequences of her blind devotion to Ryan. The look on her face, the dawning realization that her favoritism had cost her everything, was something I'll never forget. She chose to stay. It wasn't love for Dad or me that kept her there. It was fear of losing her comfortable life. But it was the first time Ryan didn't get what he wanted from her, and that was enough. Ryan's fall was swift and complete. With no degree, no connections, and a reputation in tatters, he found work as a mechanic's assistant at a small garage. He moved in with Karen, united in their shared disgrace. Last I heard, they fight constantly, trapped by circumstances and mutual resentment. As for me, I walked away from all of it. The divorce finalized, I transferred to my company's Seattle office, putting 3,000 miles between me and my past. I see Henry once a month. Not for Ryan's sake, but because that little boy still calls me Daddy and doesn't understand why adults break each other so completely. I was promoted twice in 18 months. My apartment overlooks Puget Sound. On clear days, I can see the Olympic Mountains from my balcony, their distant peaks reminding me that there's a bigger world beyond the toxic confines of family drama. I've started dating again, cautiously. Trust doesn't come easily anymore, but I'm learning. Some nights I still wake up sweating, the betrayal fresh in my mind. But those nights grow fewer. For the first time since I was a child hiding from Ryan's torments, I'm truly free.